Okay, I'm starting this out with a hot take that I feel like is true, but I can't completely explain why. So I'm going to just say it, and then I'm going to try to explain why I think it's true. So, I think consciousness arose because of sex. Today is July 28th, 2022. So, what exactly do I mean by that? I mean, if you look around at, well, first of all, every conscious thing on the planet right now is a sexually reproducing creature. So, right away, there's no such thing currently as an asexual, self-aware being. That doesn't mean that there's no such thing as, that doesn't mean it's not possible for an asexual, self-aware creature, but I'm starting to wonder if it isn't actually possible for there to be an asexual, self-aware, conscious being. And here's why. Here's why. So, if you look at humans and you look at other organisms that display patterns that we call intelligent, and then you look at where that came from and what's driving that, what's making these creatures more intelligent, it is sexual selection. So, my favorite examples are bowerbirds and pufferfish. If you look at what these creatures are doing, they're first of all, their brains, especially the birds, they've evolved what looks like our neocortex, but they evolved it independently. So the structure in the brain that creates intelligent behavior, or at least what we understand as intelligent behavior, has emerged independently at least 2 or 3 times in the evolutionary tree of life. And each time it seems like it's being driven by the sexual selection of the females of the species. So the male bowerbirds, for example, have built these elaborate structures in order to impress females who will land there and look at their structure and determine if they're worthy of having their genes passed on. So it seems to me that the relationship between the male and female is actually what's pushing creatures towards higher consciousness, higher intelligence, higher creativity. Like these bowerbirds are becoming engineers because of the sexual selective pressure of women, or of female bowerbirds, I guess. So I think, and this is where I get probably a little bit controversial, well, more controversial, is if you look at a story like Genesis. So first of all, I don't think Genesis is literally true. I think that it's metaphorically true. I mean, I personally, in case you haven't watched any other video on this channel, believe that the story of evolution is true. I think Darwin got it right. I think that we are descended from animals, and there's no supernatural creator of humans, right? So the Genesis story is not exactly literally true, but I do think Adam and Eve existed in some sense. And so you have to wonder in the story, how come Eve eats the apple first? Like, why wasn't it Adam who ate the apple first and then gave it to Eve? Why was it Eve and then Adam? How come Eve woke up first and then gave it to Adam? And so, obviously, the Bible's written before Darwin, so these people didn't have an evolutionary understanding of humans. But it seems like the Bible is this sort of, or at least the Genesis story, because that's, I mean, arguably 10,000 years old or something, right? Or stories like the Genesis story. I think there's a lot of stories that sort of tell something similar about the relationship between men and women, or males and females. There's something, you know, you think about how, all right, I'm gonna come at this from a totally wacky angle and then work my way back to the spot. Why is the transgender idea so hot right now? It is very hot. And people are arguing over like what's a man, what is a woman, what is a man, why, what, like. Why is our society set up the way that it is? Why does it look like men are running everything? Why does it seem like women have been oppressed for so long? Why is there this idea like the world has been unfair towards women? Like, where are these ideas coming from? And it's coming from different perspectives on the relationship between men and women throughout history. And I think that the Adam and Eve story is basically another way of conceptualizing the relationship between men and women throughout time. And I think the reason that this is such an important question is because we are sexually reproducing species. And the whole point of my genome, what all of my genes are trying to do is get themselves as far into the future as possible. So my body is built in a way that's intended by the genes to get me to be as fit as possible and get my genes as far into the future as possible. So my brain, my mind, which is part of my body, you know, what I would like to say is that a mind is just the experience of a body, really, which is a weird way to say it, but that's why it's so hard to separate this out from my own personal experience. Like when I'm trying to understand men and women as concepts, it's impossible for me to separate. I am a male that is trying to reproduce with females, so it's impossible for me to separate my own personal perspectives on things with the objective understanding, if there is such a thing as an objective understanding. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is that I've been all over the place right now. What if the best way to understand myself is to understand myself as the male of a species? What if all of my thoughts and experiences are built around reproduction? So I think I got completely lost here. 8 minutes in. I don't even know where I started. What did I start with? Yeah, I think consciousness occurs because of sex. It's almost like it's in between the male and female. Like the consciousness, the self-awareness that we have really only happens because we're both trying to model each other's brains. Like a male is always trying to model a female's brain. Like you're kind of always asking yourself, what do women want, right? It's always kind of been the question. If you think about a bowerbird, they designed this whole castle with this understanding of the female perspective. And it's possible that this transgender thing that's going on here, so many people experiencing gender dysphoria, what if that's some way that maybe the male brain attempting to conceptualize the female brain really just kind of, you know, with all this confusing terms about social constructionism and gender being a social construct, maybe people start to think that they're not trying to understand women, that they're you know, I put this video up with this girl saying that the problem in the West is that we attempt to derive meaning through propositions when in fact meaning is derived through participation. So maybe the best way to understand women is to become a woman, in a sense, right? Is to embody the patterns of women so that way you can understand them, maybe to put yourself closer to reproduction. Maybe that's what's happening with the transgender movement a little bit. Back and forth, you know? But I'm starting to think that really, if you think about it, men are trying to understand women, and part of understanding women involves understanding women's conception of men, which is going to involve men's conception of women. So then you think that constantly goes back and forth. It's like, what do I know that you know that I know that you know that I know that you know that I know that you know? And maybe that's entirely like that pattern, that back and forth is actually what pushes, that's where the self-awareness comes from. You're self-aware because you're a species that is trying to understand, because technically, when you think about it, since when you reproduce, you're equally likely to become male or female in the next generation, you're really just trying to understand yourself when you try to understand the female, right? And if you're a female trying to understand a male, it's the same thing. Women are trying to understand men as well. And that's the same problem, because a woman's trying to understand what a man wants from women, right? And so maybe there's this kind of embodied understanding that happens. Women embody patterns of behavior of men so that they can understand men. Men embody patterns of behavior of women so they can understand women, you know? Man, this place is not as private as the... There's people over there. I think they can hear me. There's a couple over there. What am I, 11 minutes in? That totally threw me off. Yeah, anyway, I'm willing to make a bet right now. I will put down some money, not all my money because I'm not sure, but I get the feeling that in the future, when they're starting to build these AI machines, that the actual best way to get there is to create beings that have sex. So there's gonna have to be like the male and female beings that through an evolutionary process will create self-awareness, almost. Like, is it possible to have a self-aware being that is asexual? I don't know. My take at the beginning of this was that it's not possible, truly. That self-awareness happens through sex. And I mean sex in the sense of the male and female, which are arguably as old as 500 million or a billion years old, right? So it's almost like the evolutionary process it created sex as a way to examine itself. Sex is a way of the genome looking at itself from the outside. It's like creating it's putting itself into two places. It's splitting the perspective up into two places so that it can look at itself. So the males are looking at the females and judging their reproductive fitness, and the females are looking at the males and judging theirs. And it's a way of speeding up the evolutionary process. It's a way of refining it. It's a way of getting genes further into the future. And in the end, it creates these beings that get more and more self-aware. Because it seems like if you look at all these different species, there is this push towards a higher level of consciousness. Then you get into these crazy thoughts about like, what is consciousness? What does that even mean? And then, I don't remember the name of the biologist. I saw him on Lex Friedman's podcast. He was talking about how truly, it seems like they've proved this. I mean, according to him, I don't know how they did it. I don't know if I believe him, but apparently our brains, our minds, are not actually set up to understand reality as it is, in any sense. Our understandings of reality are just there to get our genes further into the future. So, and then you start to question everything, because it's like, you're standing there holding a rock, you know? It's like, is this real? Or is my brain just, then what is real, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, wow. Okay, I already say the date. Today's July 28th, 2022. I need to make many, many more videos about racism, by the way. Racism and sexism, I think, are going to be a big focus going forward. Especially sexism. I think, arguably, it depends on how you look at the definition of sexism, but I don't think it's technically possible to not be sexist, because, I'll get into that in a later video. It comes down to, like, what is evil? Where does the evil go? I'm done. I'll see you later. Bye.